In December 2024, Brazilian authorities uncovered serious labor violations at a construction site for BYD, a Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer in Camaçari, Bahia State. Investigations revealed that 163 Chinese workers hired by the contractor Xinjiang Group were subjected to slavery-like conditions. These included overcrowded and unsanitary living quarters, confiscation of passports, withholding of wages, and excessive working hours. As we will see in this video, forced labor is a recurrent practice by some Chinese companies, and as Chinese corporations expand their production capacity outside of China, these tend to increasingly clash with local authorities and populations in the countries where these happen. As the large consumer markets of Europe and the United States clamp down on manufactured goods made using forced labor, it will become more and more difficult for such practices to fly under the radar. The recent scandal in Brazil was one of the most publicized in Latin America, hurting BYD's reputation. As an initial response, BYD terminated its contract with Xinjiang Group and relocated the affected workers to hotels. The company stated its commitment to complying with Brazilian labor laws and said it was cooperating with authorities to address the situation. But later, BYD got on the defensive. A company's spokesperson, Lee Yunfei, rejected the allegations, labeling them as distortions aimed at tarnishing the reputations of Chinese brands. Lee said, quote, "These claims jeopardize the harmonious relations between China and Brazil," unquote, effectively further asserting that misunderstandings and cultural differences played a significant role in the controversy. Xinjiang Group, the Chinese construction company, has denied the allegations, also attributing them to cultural misunderstandings and translation errors. They released statements asserting that the portrayal of their employees as enslaved was inaccurate. The Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has suspended the issuance of temporary work visas for BYD employees, and the Ministry of Justice is considering revoking residence permits for the affected workers if irregularities are confirmed. This incident has cast a shadow over BYD's expansion plans in Brazil, where the company has invested significantly to establish its largest production facility outside Asia. The factory's construction has been halted pending resolution of the labor issues. As you've seen, both Chinese companies referred to alleged cultural misunderstandings in their defense. Unfortunately, we will see that because of how they treat their workers, Chinese companies operating away from their home country often find themselves in controversies in the host countries. Chinese foreign direct investments are a bit different in nature compared to FDI from other countries. Allow me to share a little bit of anecdotal evidence in order to illustrate a point. Back in 2014, I had a conversation with a friend from Nicaragua about a Chinese project that was the center of discussion in Nicaraguan society at the time. Chinese investors wanted to build a canal through the country which would compete with the Panama Canal. On paper, it all seemed great. Nicaragua would receive billions of dollars in investment. It would revolutionize the country's infrastructure and fill up the coffers of the government, which in turn could spend that money on social programs. I was surprised to learn from my friend that this canal construction project was hugely unpopular in Nicaragua. As he told me more, I was able to understand why. Apart from the fact that very little was known in terms of viability or environmental impact studies, under the agreement, only half the workers involved in the project were going to be Nicaraguan. The Chinese investors were to bring 12,500 workers from China and another 12,500 from other countries. Most of the construction materials would be imported as well, and the canal was to be controlled by Chinese companies for a period that could range from 50 to 100 years. The canal never materialized because the main investor couldn't raise the money, but labor was a big source of local resistance. You will find that this is standard practice when it comes to Chinese investments across the world. Professor Yu Yang from the University of Illinois conducted a study across 49 African countries. She found that Chinese multinational corporations in Africa are often criticized for hiring Chinese expatriates at the expense of native workers. However, her study showed that the number of expatriate workers depended on the host country's labor conditions. In host countries with weaker labor rights, Chinese foreign direct investment increased the number of Chinese expatriate workers, but in those countries where labor rights were stronger, this didn't happen. Even when the alleged abuses were not illegal, that didn't stop locals from protesting. Protests and riots have erupted across Africa in response to Chinese firms' excessive reliance on Chinese expatriates. Politicians have critiqued Chinese firms for importing their own workers. The concern is that Chinese multinational corporations, unlike multinationals from other countries, may not contribute to the employment or training of native workers. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, China's flagship global infrastructure project, has been linked to multiple labor abuse allegations. In several African nations, Chinese construction firms have been accused of exploiting local workers, paying below minimum wage, and providing substandard working conditions. In African mining operations, Chinese firms have been implicated in forced labor practices involving local communities. Reports cite long working hours, hazardous conditions, and the suppression of union activities. Southeast Asia has also seen controversies involving labor practices by Chinese multinationals. The garment industry in Southeast Asia has seen numerous forced labor accusations. Factories associated with Chinese supply chains have reportedly exploited vulnerable populations, including refugees and undocumented migrants. In the Caribbean, back in 2018, the Dominican Republic established diplomatic relations with Communist China at the expense of Taiwan. Just a few days prior, Kingtum, a Chinese aluminum extrusion and profile factory, had opened. It was highly publicized as the first of many Chinese factories to set foot in the country thanks to the newly established friendship. As the years went on, the influx of other high-profile Chinese investment failed to materialize, and the one company that had arrived, Kingtum, has been penalized at least twice for serious violations of Dominican labor laws. In 2022, the factory was closed due to practices that endangered the lives of its workers. In December 2024, it was closed yet again by authorities, and all its products were banned from entering the United States after the Customs and Border Protection Agency found that it had used convicts and forced or indentured labor to manufacture aluminum products. The main problem lies in the fact that certain practices that are common in China are illegal in the Western world and other regions. One of the most notable differences lies in overtime policies. In many industries in China, workers often endure excessively long hours with inadequate compensation. While Chinese labor law technically limits the work week to 44 hours and requires overtime pay, enforcement is inconsistent. In sectors like manufacturing and tech, employees regularly work 12 to 16-hour days under the so-called 996 schedule, working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Chinese workers lack the right to form independent unions. The only legal labor union is the state-controlled All China Federation of Trade Unions, which prioritizes stability over advocating for workers' rights. Independent strikes and labor protests are often suppressed. While Chinese law prohibits child labor and forced labor, these practices persist in certain regions and industries. Investigations have revealed instances of children working in factories, often under hazardous conditions, and reports of forced labor have emerged, particularly involving ethnic minorities like the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. China has made strides in improving workplace safety, but issues remain, particularly in industries like construction, mining, and manufacturing. Poor enforcement of safety regulations often leads to high rates of workplace injuries and fatalities. Reports of wage theft and delayed payments are common in certain Chinese industries, particularly in construction and among migrant workers. Workers frequently go months without pay or receive reduced wages, often with little recourse. When Chinese companies expand their operations overseas, they often bring business models and labor practices that have worked for them in their domestic market. However, these practices can lead to significant problems when implemented in foreign markets. These challenges create friction with local laws, communities, and labor unions, ultimately damaging the company's reputations and raising broader concerns about labor rights and global business ethics. Forced labor allegations or exploitative practices by Chinese companies tarnish their reputation globally. Negative press, coupled with social media amplification, can erode public trust and deter potential partners or investors. China has significant interest in Brazil related to the establishment of semiconductor facilities. Go to this next video to learn more about the nascent semiconductor industry in Latin America. This is Latinometry. Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of our interesting videos about Latin America and the world. Please like and share this video, and thanks for watching.